Is it natural order for women to have to submit and men to get to lead and dominate? Is it baked into our DNA? These facts might seem so indisputable because our history, our biology, and our religion have all tried to explain male dominance that happens. But as I pointed to in last week's video, there might be something else going on. This might not be part of our physical DNA, but something more along the lines of our cultural DNA, something that gets baked into the cultural zeitgeist through our stories, myth, and the views of history that we're told, which don't paint the entire picture. If this is so, if it is part of our cultural DNA and not our physical DNA, what other doors of possibilities could open up for us to understand our past and be able to make a new future? That is what we are going to explore today. I've been studying these things deeply for 15 years. I decided never to go back to university just because I wanted to take an interdisciplinary approach and be able to study human behavior, body language, history, Bible theology, and be able to pull in the anthropology and the sociology and be able to look at it through that lens that we talked about last week with the creation of Patriarchy by Gerda Lerner and those 10 steps that she outlined that helped to create this cultural zeitgeist that we are living in. So let's go back to that question that I started the video with. Is it natural for women to submit and men to dominate? Spoiler alert, we actually don't know. We don't have anything in the DNA that points to this being an absolute truth for us. Without finding that gene for dominance and submission isolated within our genome and individually expressed universally across every single person on this planet, there's not much science to say that this is a universal trait of human beings. So what do we do? How do we decide if this is natural or not? Today, I'm going to help you understand why it seems like it is universally true, even though I hold to the fact that it probably isn't, and science cannot prove it to be so. When I was a Christian, I was taught to believe in absolute truth, and that relative truth was nothing more than a leftist way to be able to get to sin and do the things that they wanted to do. After 15 years of doing what I've done, as I said in the intro, studying this stuff from all these different angles, I have come to understand that truth is pretty much relative, and it depends on the angle with which you're looking back at history and your own personal biases, whether you're aware of those or not. History and stories and religion, science, biology, they can only take us so far. First, let's look at the historical perspective, and then we're going to look at the science perspective and understand that even though they're very limited, because science and history often gets told from a perspective of the victors, yes, even science, then it has a slanted lens of bias that I just mentioned. History, as we know it, is far from being complete. We'll get into that more in a couple of videos, but for today's video, I just want you to know that as new discoveries are made, history is being rewritten. This happened when they discovered the Nag Hammadi in 1948, I believe it was, and then the Dead Sea Scrolls. The historians had some insights into some of these manuscripts maybe being in existence because they were mentioned, or the passages that we found in these scrolls were mentioned in other verses of other texts. We didn't know for sure until they were discovered, but it's rewriting some of that Christian history and getting people to ask deeper questions about what has been handed down to us in the canonized Bible. What we do know is that these documents had to be hidden for some purpose in order for them to not get destroyed. Most likely because the victors had decided what should be told in history and what should not, and they outlawed a lot of these books, and these books either got burnt or they got buried, thankfully, so that we could find them in our current day and age. But we don't know how much more of history has gotten wiped from the face of the earth because of the victors that have been able to write history for us, telling people that they need to believe in this version of history and only this version of history until it gets told so many times until they forgot that anything else ever happened. I want to read a quote from the start of my book, The Sacred Tryst, the working title, that really sets the stage for how to understand history for the 2,000-year journey I'm about to take people on, as we look at where Jesus showed up in history and look at it from a different angle that I set at the start of the book with this quote. History is nothing more than an elusive mirage dancing across our vision, able to sift and change with each new wave of discoveries. It's painted largely from the dominant perspective. how much more is there to uncover? Isn't that fabulous? I love that quote. Science. Let's look at that perspective and why it might be limited. I'm going to ask you a question. If you're 40 plus years old, you probably have heard that eggs were originally bad for you, and then they were good for you, and then they were bad for you, and then it was just the egg whites, leave the egg yolks out. And science is continually changing its mind based on what new tools it has to evaluate the scientific world and our evolution of being able to translate that information and data we get from the scientific world into our reality today. So therefore, we can't always put all of our weight in science as well. It's not a perfect science, pardon the pun. While science of all different kinds can help us to reconstruct the past, it really will never give us a full picture of why people decided to live the way they did or how they decided to live the way they did. And it will absolutely not tell us how they felt. It can hint at that through the stories that were told. But again, as I keep on saying, history and stories are always told from a very biased perspective. This is even more especially true of pre-patriarchal days where we didn't have any written history. Writing was invented somewhere between 3,500, 4,000 BCE. And before that, we lived for millennia. So most of human history has not even been recorded for us to understand. We might have some of the anthropological evidence, but that doesn't really tell us a lot of the inner world or inner thinking of our ancestors. All right, so if science and history can't tell us what is definitively true, are there any other things that we can look at to see if it's natural order for women to submit and men to lead? We can look at the bonobos and the chimpanzees, our two closest relatives in the DNA pool. Many people know about the chimpanzees and that's what they point to say, hey, it's natural order for men to dominate because chimpanzees are patriarchal and they are violent and dominant. There's also the bonobos, which some scientists argue are even a closer relative to us. And the bonobos are notorious for being free lovers. Yes, you heard that right. They like to have lots of love, and that's how they settle a lot of their arguments. And they are organized more through the matriarchal line.
Howdy, I'm jumping in here in the editing stage because I just, ADHD brain, decided to go look for some bonobo pictures or a little bit more information because they are so freaking fascinating. Found this amazing TED Talk that just came out midway about through 2024. So it's pretty recent. It's a TED Talk in Asheville. I'm going to put the link in the description below, but I'm going to show you a little clip of the difference that this woman has researched so you can understand for yourself what I'm getting at here before we jump over to breaking down patriarchy in their episode as well, if you want to do more research on your own. Here we go.
I first learned about bonobos as a writer at National Geographic. I was assigned to work on a book project about the great ape. I knew about gorillas and orangutans and chimpanzees, but I was amazed to discover that there was a fourth great ape, the bonobo, which so strongly resembles us and in the most astonishing way. I'd never heard of a bonobo, and now more than 30 years later, still most people don't even know they exist. Yet they are humankind's closest relative. Bonobos are so different from our other close relative, the chimpanzee, the one we're usually compared to. According to evolutionary theory, we are equally related. So the human line went off in one direction and the pan line split again, creating two species, bonobos and chimps. While very similar in some ways, they're like polar opposites in others. Chimpanzees have a patriarchal, male-dominated, competitive society. They are the only primates besides humans that wage violent, premeditated attacks on others of their own kind, usually over territory and resources, and often to the death. Sounds familiar, right? Same things most human wars are fought over. Bonobos, on the other hand, share resources and territory instead of fighting over them. Among bonobos, the females are in charge. They have a peaceful, matriarchal, and more egalitarian society. When bonobo groups meet in the forest, they greet their neighbors, share a feast, and have a little love fest. Bonobos are the only primate besides us humans that has sex, not just for procreation, but also for recreation, for bonding, to relieve tension, or simply for pleasure. Bonobos make a lot of love, and they do so in every form and fashion, including with members of either gender. In essence, bonobos are bisexual. Beyond that, there is no sexual coercion in bonobo land. This is in stark contrast to chimpanzee society, where females are forced to mate with ranking males and are often battered in the process. Bonobo females are free to choose their mates. Bonobo females make alliances with each other, often sealed with sexual bonds of their own. And this is how they keep the physically stronger males in check. Sure, they have spats and squabbles every now and then, and when they do, they kiss and make up. Bonobos are all about peace and love. That's why they're called the hippie chimp. It's as if bonobos and chimps represent the yin and yang of human nature. Venus and Mars, the female and male paradigms. Right in front of our eyes, we see the two sides of ourselves demonstrated in our closest relatives.
For more on this, I'm going to link to the episode over on Breaking Down Patriarchy, where she talks even more about the science behind chimpanzees and bonobos and how that relates to us. The bonobos and the chimpanzees show us, though, that there is no conclusive evidence that we are meant to be dominated and men are meant to lead. Two closest DNA relatives, and it's 50-50. Let's move on to some of the evidence that I think is super exciting that points to the fact that women are not naturally submissive, that we are not naturally meant to submit, and men are not naturally meant to lead submissive women. One of these facts is the laws. If it was so natural for women to be submissive and for men to lead those women without any fighting of that authority, then why are there so many laws throughout all of history that has to suppress and oppress women and their voices and tell them where they are allowed to be within society and their home? Why are so much of our religion dedicated to telling women that they are meant to be submissive? If it was natural order, wouldn't it go without being said? If the sun is rising every day in the east and setting in the west, we don't have to write a law about it. It just happens. So then we have to ask, why were these laws needed? And what was the behaviors that they were trying to control that weren't natural for the women? They tried to make this natural through the stories. And a lot of women believed these stories until we had revolts, up until our modern age, up until the modern age of the feminine awakening of the world, to realize that she has been in this cultural submission and oppression for almost 6,000 years. As women have woken up, as there's been 1, 2, 3 feminist movements, and I think there's probably a new one starting as we speak, as we talk about this, looking at the fact that a lot of modern women have chosen to either get divorced, never get married, never have children, have a career, be able to provide for themselves, have a career and become a single mother. If it was natural order for women to have to be led because they need to be submissive, if that was really built into our DNA, then how could so many women be standing on their own 2 feet in this day and age and making their way in the world without the men, whether it be their husband, their father, their brother, the uncle, whatever religion has tried to tell us we have to have? So many of us are breaking that mold and saying, yeah, we can do it on our own. We do not need to be led because we are not naturally submissive. That's what I think it's really saying. And let's look at this. Throughout history, a lot of women couldn't wait till they became a widow. And that is actually when they would thrive in their community and help establish a deeper root. They didn't need a male in order to continue to survive. They had his inheritance as they would have needed, or they figured out a different way now that they didn't have to be married anymore. As you can see, I believe it is not natural order for us to submit and for men to lead. But why does it seem so inherently indisputable? Why has it been going on for 6,000 years? It's because of that cultural DNA that I keep talking about. And that cultural DNA gets embedded into us and through our society via our stories, our history, and our myths. These stories shape our world and our culture and our politics. And they're told from generation to generation, just establishing the patriarch and the idea that women submitting and men leading is just natural. I'm going to unpack this a little bit more for you by looking back at history to when this really got embedded into the written zeitgeist and therefore into our DNA and passed forward until this present age. That was with Plato and Aristotle. They were writing at the tail end of that 2,500 year period we talked about last week that it took for patriarchy to embed itself into our culture. So they're looking back at history, and the writings that they had probably were very limited compared to all of the writings we have today from across the globe, seeing that it just was always this way between men and women. So they were writing their philosophies more about how they interpreted what they saw in the world versus more of what was a natural order. It was a natural order because that was the only thing they knew, the only thing that their history books could tell them. And so they embedded it into the DNA, saying things such as this: The one gender is far superior to the other in just about every sphere. Plato. The male is by nature superior, the female inferior. The male ruler, the female subject. Aristotle. These were not scientific conclusions, as I just said. They were simply describing the world in which they lived that seemed clearly evident of the truth, because that's all they ever knew. There had been millennia at this point shaped by the patriarchal beliefs. By the time most of the Bible got written, guess what? Plato and Aristotle's beliefs were widely known and widely preached. So even Jesus did not believe in egalitarian rules as we do today. He believed that women were incomplete men, and that in order for them to get into heaven, he would make them like he is, i.e., he would make them into men, into the complete version of the human DNA, which is a different order than women to make them men. So in Jesus's kingdom, everybody is a man. I'll let you go wherever you want to go with that one. So I hope you can see that throughout history, so 2,500 years it took to anchor in patriarchy, then Aristotle and Plato came along and embedded the idea of natural order into the philosophy alongside the religious institution, which embedded the idea that it was natural order for women to submit and that it was natural order for only a male god to be around. All of this is happening simultaneously over the course of history until we get to our modern age where it seems inevitable that this is just natural order. And that's why it seems like it's so difficult to question this idea. Is it natural or is it not? So let's go back to that question again. Is it natural for women to submit and men to dominate? Again, the DNA can't really tell us because it's not isolated and expressed throughout every single human being on this planet. Therefore, we have to look at other evidence. And that evidence is pretty damning to say that it's not a natural order, in my opinion. But let me know what you think. All right, let's end on a happy note because it's so much better to end on a happy note. The thing is, just like our stories can evolve, our cultural DNA can evolve if we learn to re-look at the past through this patriarchal lens, take it off, rework history based on a different understanding, be able to see our present through that new lens, then we're able to rewrite our stories, both of the past, present, and future. And here's something for you to be mulling over this next week. Something being true or not is not as important as how we decide to move forward. Whether or not it's true that dominance and submission is true doesn't really matter. It's how do we decide to move forward in a way that benefits all of us, that truly matters. We know that we have the ability to evolve, so let's evolve. If we don't, I think we might be just missing the next evolutionary leap that we need in order to make sure that we survive as a species and as a planet. Let me know what you think. Is it natural order or is it something else? What do you think points to either one? And what do you want to do as you move forward? As we move forward into our next video, we're going to be talking more about how does patriarchy actually affect us today. I know we've done a little bit of that over the last 2 videos, but we're really going to dive into that next week, re-looking at those 10 steps, seeing how they still show up today, and seeing how it's affecting all of us in this present age. Until next time.